I think the Russian plan is just to send more and more and more soldiers to their deaths, but eventually wear down the Ukrainians, not least by depleting their ammunition stocks.
Well, Russian soldiers on the front line in the Kharkiv region are being struck down by a mystery mouse fever, and that's according to Ukrainian military intelligence. The symptoms of this seem to include severe headache, rashes, and bleeding in the eyes. The disease is caused by exposure to the urine of infected animals. Edward Lucas is a writer and transatlantic security expert who joins me now. Good afternoon, Edward.
Well, it looks as though the Russian military authorities and their political masters regard the lives of their soldiers as essentially expendable. They're being sent into the maelstrom, into the mincing machine of the front line, ill-equipped, without enough ammunition, without enough training, and very badly led. So it shouldn't come as any great surprise if their lives are not really worth anything, their health isn't worth anything either.
But I mean, how do you think, how much do you think a disease like this could actually affect things, could affect the war and their effort? I mean, presumably quite a great deal if those symptoms are anything to go by.
Well, ever since Russia started its full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2021, we've been watching with a mixture of sort of horror and expectation the appalling strains that are put on the morale of the Russian soldiers. And we've been waiting for this to have some sort of effect on their fighting capability. But I have to say it hasn't happened so far. And perhaps the lesson of the last 2 years is one that we also would be able to draw from the history of the Second World War, 1941 to 45, when the Soviet Union took part, which is that Russian soldiers will put up with privations and abuse that in any other military would lead to mutiny, and it doesn't seem to have happened. Now, there is still an expectation on the Ukrainian and on the Western side that eventually the appalling conditions in which they're fighting will lead to surrender, desertion, and mutiny. And I've been saying this since February 2021. But I have to say, it doesn't seem to have happened. And it's interesting. In Russian, these soldiers are known as logs, as in throw more logs on the fire. And I think the Russian plan is just to send more and more and more soldiers to their deaths, but eventually wear down the Ukrainians, not least by depleting their ammunition stocks. And so they take ground in small amounts at vast expense, but they do push forward a bit, and that's what we've been seeing, particularly in the east of Ukraine around Avdiivka.
I mean, that really is a tragedy, the way you describe it, logs on the fire. But you say the expectation of mutiny and that they would, push back has been there hanging over this for a long time. So, but why is it? Why hasn't that happened and surprised people in that way? Is there a sort of blind or unmovable, unshakable loyalty?
I wouldn't exactly say it's loyalty. A lot of the soldiers don't really know, where they are or why they're fighting. And it's not that this is a sort of highly politicized, motivated force that has been told exactly why they're why they're there. But I think the main thing is fear that if you retreat or disobey orders, you just get shot. And that the Russian military runs on a kind of brutal regime, which would be quite abhorrent to anyone in a Western military. And so if you've got a choice between putting up with rat bites and being poisoned in the trenches or complaining and getting shot, you probably carry on putting up with the rat bites and all the other horrible things that go on there. Eventually there will come a breaking point. And if you remember in 1917, that is what happened, that the Russian Imperial Army, which was perhaps even more appallingly mismanaged than its successors, in the end just got fed up with fighting the Germans and and Austria-Hungary and started shooting their officers and going home. And the hope on the Ukrainian, on the Western side, is that we will see another 1917 where the soldiers stop fighting and this leads to political change in Moscow. I still think that there's a perfectly good reason to believe that must happen eventually. But I also have to say that nearly 2 years on into the war, it hasn't happened yet.
I mean, I said in reaction to your last answer, and of course to all your answers, just what a sort of depressing situation this is. Not least as we go into, well, the Christmas period and come out into the new year, January 2024. Sort of tragic that not long until 2 years this war has been going on for. I mean, what do you think? And I know it's always incredibly hard to predict anything, and as we're seeing so many of our expectations are not going the way people have thought. But what are your thoughts about what the war looks like, the situation moving into 2024?
I think by far, I mean, my thoughts are one, amazement at the way the Ukrainians fight. Two, immense gratitude because they're fighting not only for their freedom but for ours. Three, fury that we in the West have let them down. We have overpromised and underdelivered on everything from the quantity and the quality of the equipment to the ammunition stocks needed to sustain their fight and the financial aid that they need. And if we had given them what we said we were going to give them, or even better, given them more than that and given it earlier, they would have won by now. And it's absolutely clear that they're not a pushover. They can learn to use Western equipment very effectively. And when we have sent Western equipment, it's had devastatingly good effects. But we haven't sent enough. We've sent too many different kinds of equipment. So there's all sorts of problems with the supply chain. And it's really frustrating. 100,000 Ukrainians, probably more, are either dead or have suffered life-changing mental, physical injuries because we didn't get our act together, and that is an enormous stain on our honor, on our reputation. And it's still possible that Ukraine could lose. I don't think it's likely. If it does, we face an absolute catastrophe in European security, and it will be our fault. We had a chance to do this right, and we didn't do it.
Well, it's a bleak picture, and we can only hope for change going into 2024. But Edward Lucas, fascinating to hear your thoughts, writer and transatlantic security expert. Thank you so much for joining us on Times Radio, and have a very happy Christmas.